Good morning. My name is Beckie Evans, and my husband and I are members here at Emmanuel, and I sometimes get to speak, and it is my favorite thing to do. So pleased that I can be here today. I love this story. A few months ago, my husband Jarrett and I went on our yearly cruise to Alaska, and we both really look forward to it. It gives us space to year past and plan for what's next in the future. And one day I was sitting on deck 6, the Lido deck, and I was just watching the never-ending ocean, and I was thinking about where I was at and where I was frustrated in my professional career. And I started thinking about Joseph, and I really started thinking about Joseph. It impacted me so much that I started Googling. I opened up my Bible app and I started taking screenshots of Joseph's story. And then a few months ago when we met with Ed to plan our summer series and he mentioned Joseph, I'm like, oh, so interesting. This is where I'm at. That when I was on my cruise, the part that really was impacting me that was when Joseph was in prison and had said me a favor when things go well for you, mention me to Pharaoh so he might let me out of this place. Of course, the cupbearer forgets, and Joseph stays in prison longer, and Joseph must have felt like he was back in the pit that we're going to talk about today. In Genesis, they call the pit a cistern, or a place of no escape. Pits are awful. Sometimes they're unexpected, but they are usually places of no escape. And when I think of Joseph's story, I'm just going to see if this works. Oh, there we go. Good. When we think, sort of rest on 3 words, and that is loss of relationship. When Joseph's brothers threw him into the pit, Joseph lost relationship with his brothers, lost relationship with his dad, relationship with those around him. For Joseph, the sudden loss of relationship with his brothers that came from them throwing him into that pit and then selling him probably hit him from out of the blue. And that's often how it is for us. Not always, but sometimes that's how it is for us. Other times, pit was coming and we've watched it creeping up closer and closer until we can't ignore it anymore. I have had 3 big pit. I lost a job that I loved. And it's the last event that I want to talk about a little bit this morning. And I don't like talking about myself in sermons, but I will often say to people, story is the currency of changed lives. In the end, all we are is story. In Joseph's story, his life changed in that pit, and my life changes in every pit that I'm in too. So forgive me, I'm going to talk about me for a little bit. For 8 years, I was on staff at a church in Abbotsford, and this is before I worked at Emmanuel, so please don't think this story is about Emmanuel. It's not. It was a really unique situation because I was able to be wildly creative, and I had really fun coworkers. It was like I would come up with a crazy idea in staff meeting, and it would just happen, and I felt like, oh, I can do anything. I can move mountains. I can create programming and ministry out of my head. I was experiencing people around me were also wildly creative. To this day, some of my best friends are people that I met in that church. I'm an only child, as some of you might know, and I grew up really, really craving family. We didn't live close to my cousins, so I often felt very alone. But when I was working, I had found my brothers and sisters. They were fun. They loved Jesus. They were eager to learn. It was a time of enormous creativity for me. In the summer of 2013, that church hired an executive pastor, and we all went to work on a new strategic plan to usher the church into a new era of growth and effectiveness. Creative, I was in my element. I was also very excited personally because Jarrett and I were about to get married. And in March 2014, when we did marry, I made sure that the church staff and church members who had become like family to me were sitting in the front rows, the rows that were reserved of celebration with those who I dearly loved. 6 months after that, on a Wednesday morning, I arrived at the church at about 8:45, was called into the boardroom, and was told that because of the new strategic plan that I had worked so hard on and I was so passionate about, and I was creating all these potential opportunities, because of that, staff were being laid off, and my name was on that list. I went into shock. I went home. I told my new husband and my kids what had happened. I strategically unfriended some people on Facebook. And then I threw up. I threw up again and again. My spiritual home was gone. No longer in relationship with people I called my family. I had been thrown into a proverbial pit, and I felt like I had been sold to the Ishmaelites. My people were gone. I had all of a sudden just experienced a colossal loss of relationship, and I never saw it coming. That story is now almost 11 years old, and like Joseph, I made it out of that pit. And for the next few minutes, I want to talk about two things. Usually when folks speak in church on a Sunday morning, they have 3 points, but for whatever reason, I only ever have 2. But anyway, I want to talk about 2 things. I want to talk about how Joseph's story in Genesis 37 illustrates the complexities of human relationships. When we've read this story, we've probably already, and practically, what can we do when we're thrown in a pit, or when people that we love are thrown into a pit, even if the pit is expected or if the pit is not expected? Okay, here we go. The first part, the complexities of human relationships. Now, I want to stop talking about me, and I want to go back to talking about Joseph. Joseph's story divided. Joseph is 17. He's tending flocks with his brothers. They're mean to him, so he brings back a bad report about them to his dad. The simple phrase might sound innocent. In Genesis, it just says bad report. That is marked by competition and rivalry, tattling to your dad about your siblings could be an explosive action, and it was. Because Joseph was Jacob's favorite. Jacob's favoritism is a tinder that sets the whole chapter ablaze. He loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him, a coat of many colors. That robe is more than just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of privilege, of status, of being set apart. And the result is bitter. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. That's verse 4. Here we encounter the first dynamic of power in relationships, and that is the destructive potential of favoritism. Jacob's partiality, likely rooted in his own lifelong experience of parental bias. Remember, his parents were Isaac and Rebekah. There was a lot of parental bias there. The divided love between Esau and between his twin brother Esau and himself has now repeated itself in the next generation. When love becomes exclusive and hierarchical, turns on itself and breeds resentment. We see this in families and in workplaces and in church communities. The pain of being overlooked or undervalued can have a corrosive effect on the soul. And Joseph himself is not blameless. We've been talking about his dreams. He shares 2 dreams with his family that clearly place him above his brothers and even his parents. In his dreams, the sheaves of grain bow down to his sheaf. The sun, moon, and stars bow down to him. Like, is he being naive, or is he being arrogant, or simply being honest? But his father kept the matter in mind. Joseph's brothers' jealousy eventually takes form in violent action. When Joseph goes out to meet them in the fields, they conspire to kill him. Here illustrates a second dynamic of the power of human relationships: the devastating consequences of unchecked resentment. Reuben, the eldest, intervenes to prevent his murder, suggesting instead that they just throw him into a pit or a cistern. His intention is to, but he's ultimately powerless to stop what follows. When a caravan of Ishmaelites approaches, Judah suggests they sell Joseph into slavery. After all, what will we gain if we kill our brother? And so for 20 pieces of silver, Joseph is sold. He is rejected by strangers, but his own flesh and blood. And sometimes our families wound us most deeply because they're the places that we expect to be safe. In spiritual families like churches or small groups, close communities, when love is cuts to the core. This was my experience at my former church, and you might have had experiences like that too. It throws us into a pit. Joseph is gone, sold into slavery, but the brothers still need to manage appearances. They dip his robe in goat's blood and take it back, just as they planned, believe that Joseph is dead. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. The deceit worked, but the cost was high. Jacob is devastated. The families live in a false peace held together by silence and lies. Here we see another truth about power in families and in close-knit groups. We often try to manage appearances to maintain control, even at the cost of truth. I once sat with a counselor who said to me, "See, the brothers think they have resolved the problem by getting rid of Joseph, but instead they created a wound that will fester in secrecy for years. Jacob cannot be comforted. Their lie has cost them their father's joy and their own peace." When we try to control outcomes by manipulating the truth, whether in families and ministries and communities, it erodes trust and it fosters sorrow. Control through deception is a fragile power. We see that all throughout the world today. Control through deception is a fragile power. Now, this might sound like a super depressed sermon, but I want to encourage you that even in this dark and broken beginning, God is not absent, and God is not absent in your pit either. This summer, we are going to be talking about many of Joseph's post-pit stories. And I don't want to give anything away, but I will encourage you that this is only a chapter of Joseph's journey. It spans betrayal, imprisonment, promotion, and ultimately reconciliation. But none of that redemptive arc without this first pit story. Joseph's dreams were not lies. They were previews of what God would bring about. But before those dreams could be fulfilled, Joseph's heart would need to be broken and remade. Character would need to be formed. The brothers would need to come face to face with their own guilt, and humility, resilience, and trust in God. This is the paradox of God's providence. God is always at work, even when human relationships fail and power is abused. Even the worst chapters of our story can be taken up into God's larger redemptive plan. And I'm going to talk more about this when I talk about, and for those relationships that are like family, close friendships, church fellowships, small group, we must remember that the intimacy of those relationships carries both blessing and risk. It's easy to hurt those to whom we are close, but it's also in those very relationships that God brings about healing, restoration, growth, humility, resilience, trust in God. Okay, here we go. Oh, we're in a pit. Now what? John's got it. You might be in a pit right now. You might know some people who are in pits right now. And this is the part of my message where I do not claim to know all the answers, but I can tell you what I have found to be true in my own life. And the first thing I'd like to encourage you in is acknowledge the pain. Don't pretend that you're not in a pit when you're in a pit. There is no way around the pain. There is only through. I found it really interesting this morning that when Rachel led us in the prayers of the people, it was about the Lord being our good shepherd. Psalm 23. People often read Psalm 23 after a tragedy, but this morning I want to consider something preemptive about Psalm 23. We said this morning, we called the Lord our good shepherd. And if we believe that our good shepherd guides us along right paths, even when we are in the darkest part of our journey, that is also a right path. We are not walking through the valley of the shadow of death because we have somehow failed or are unworthy or have flawed character. We are in a pit because we are human, and being in a pit is hard. Comforted is because in this world we will have trouble, but our good shepherd brought us to this pit, brought us to this valley, and our good shepherd remains with us in that pit. That is the only thing we can know for sure. Now I want to talk a little bit about Romans 8:28. Romans 8:28 says, all things work out for good to those who love God, for those who are called according to his purpose. Sometimes when you are in a pit or in a valley, people around you might not know what to say. And some of them will say dumb things to you, like, everything happens for a reason. God will come out of this. People might quote to you Romans 8:28, all things work out for good. Now, this morning we want to have a talk about context. This verse, one's faith, but to shut down their suffering. We should never shut down anyone's suffering. What do I mean? Imagine a situation in which you have someone dealing with a traumatic event. For example, parents who have just lost a child. Any number of situations could be multiplied. And now you as a Christian come to these people and say, lost a child. Any number of situations could be multiplied. And now you as a Christian come to these people and say, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purposes. Now, I know that suffering can have redemptive purpose. What others use for evil, God can use for good. This is tremendously helpful for our life as we go through difficult times. But in a situation when something is deeply traumatic, like being tossed in a pit, the one who says Romans 8:28 can be heard as saying, stop being sad, get over it. Remember, God uses this for good. When my first marriage ended, someone said that to me, and I was like, what? Now this brings us back to the story of Joseph. And imagine that Joseph's brothers have a copy of the book of Romans. Now, Joseph, don't be mad. Remember, all things work out for your good. God is going to do great things through us throwing you into a pit. You should really be thanking us. We're going to be talking about Joseph all summer, but by the time we get to late August, you will see that it's Joseph who interpreted his situation correctly, not his brothers. It's Joseph who, after much prayer and soul searching, can eventually reflect and see what God has done in his life and the life of God's people through him. But that reflection does not come from outside, it's from Joseph doing Joseph's internal work. I'm going to end today with something that I said at the beginning. Many times it is some sort of loss of relationship that throws us into a pit. What can we offer ourselves? What can we offer to other people who we know are in a pit? What we can offer ourselves is the gift of time. Do not rush this, and don't pretend it doesn't exist. Your grief is real. It can't be avoided. And what can we offer others who are in a pit? We can offer them relationship. There's a short little video that probably lots of you have seen by Brene Brown. Talks about the difference between sympathy and empathy. We're going to quickly watch this. It's only about 2 minutes.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space where, hey, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Let's pray. Sovereign God, thanks for bringing us as a church to this place and to this story of Joseph. Thank you that you were going to be walking with us through it this summer. As we consider our own pit experiences or see the pits of others, we come to you with open hands that we will learn what we need to learn, see what we need to see. We pray that as we journey, that our lips will be your lips, our mind will be your mind, our heart will be your heart. Thank you for bringing us to these hard places. Thank you for staying with us through these hard places. Pray that we'll respond to others with empathy instead of sympathy, and show us what that is. Thank you for loving us so much. Amen.